All right, so let's jump into something that's maybe not the most exciting topic, but it's definitely important. We're going to be talking about some upcoming IRS deadlines. You know, those ones coming up on January 31st for W-2s and 1099 NECs.
Right, yeah.
And we've all seen these forms before, but today we're going a little deeper, like really going to unpack the details and the potential issues, and maybe we'll uncover some surprising facts along the way.
I think we will. What I find really interesting about this deadline is that it's often misunderstood. People think, oh, it's just for employers, but it really impacts independent contractors as well. And when you miss this deadline, let's just say there's some consequences.
Okay, so you're saying this isn't just about those big corporations sending out forms.
Not at all. Think about it. If you're a small business owner and you've hired a few independent contractors in the past year, you might think, oh, it's only a few forms. I can just mail them in late. But even for a small business, missing the deadline for just 1099 NECs, that could mean a penalty of $2,900. And for larger businesses, those numbers get really big really fast.
Wow, yeah, that's a serious hit. So it seems like the IRS is serious about this January 31st deadline. But I think a lot of people are confused about who needs to file these forms. Can you clarify that for us?
Sure. Let's start with the W-2. It's pretty straightforward. If you have employees, you need to send them a W-2 by January 31st. This form summarizes their wages, taxes withheld, and other important information the IRS needs. It's basically their income report card for the year.
Makes sense. And that's where e-filing comes in, right?
Exactly. If you are filing 10 or more forms, e-filing is required by the IRS. And honestly,
Yeah.
even if you're only filing a few, e-filing is the best way to go. It's much faster and more secure. And there's less room for error. It's like the express lane for filing your taxes.
Yeah, for sure. Plus, I've heard that even a small error on these forms can mean a penalty. Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
The IRS scrutinizes these forms very carefully. A misplaced decimal point, a transposed digit,
Yep.
even a missing hyphen in a social security number. All of these can lead to penalties, and those penalties add up quickly. They can range from a few hundred to several $1,000s per form.
Wow, so it's not just about meeting the deadline, it's about being accurate too.
Exactly. It's crucial to have a good system for record keeping throughout the year.
Right. Now let's talk about the 1099 NEC. This is where things can get tricky. Not every freelancer or independent contractor gets a 1099 NEC.
Yeah, that's an important point. The 1099 NEC is specifically for non-employee compensation. So if you paid someone $600 or more for services during the year, and they weren't your employee, you'll likely need to file a 1099 NEC for them.
Got it. And this is where understanding the different types of 1099 forms can be really helpful. I think a lot of people just assume that any payment they get for freelance work is reported on a 1099 NEC, but that's not always true.
You're right. There are several different types of 1099 forms, and each one covers a specific type of income. Like if you receive royalties, you'll probably get a 1099 MISC, or if you sell stock and make a profit, you might receive a 1099B.
So it's not one size fits all. You really need to know which form is right for your situation.
Yeah, and that can be tricky, especially for people who are new to freelancing or self-employment. It's really important to do your research and make sure you understand which forms you need to file based on your income sources.
Right. And if you're not sure, talking to a tax professional can be super helpful. They can guide you through all the details and make sure you're meeting the requirements.
Definitely. Speaking of all the nuances, there's a pretty common misconception about extensions. I think we should clear that up.
Yeah. I've heard people say, I can just file for an extension if I need more time, but it's not that simple, is it?
No, it's not a free pass. It might seem like a tempting option, but it's important to know the limitations. You can request a 30-day extension using Form 8809, but it's not guaranteed. The IRS grants extensions only in specific cases, like a natural disaster or serious illness.
So you shouldn't rely on it as a backup plan.
Nope. And even if you do get an extension, it only gives you more time to file the forms with the IRS. You still need to give copies to your employees or contractors by the original deadline of January 31st.
Oh, wow. So planning and organization are key. What are your tips for staying on top of these deadlines and making sure everything is filed accurately?
Well, one of the most important things is to start early. Don't wait until the last minute to gather everything and prepare your forms. The more time you have, the less stressful it'll be.
That's good advice. For me, the hardest part is keeping track of all the documents. Any suggestions for staying organized?
Definitely. Digital record keeping can really help. There are so many apps and software programs that let you scan and store your receipts, invoices, and tax documents electronically. It saves you space. And it's much easier to find what you need when it's time to file.
Yeah, going digital seems like the way to go these days. But what about people who still prefer paper?
Well, even with a paper system, organization is key. Have separate folders or files for different documents. Label everything clearly, and have a system for tracking deadlines. Even a simple wall calendar or a spreadsheet can really help.
Okay. I'm guessing a good system is especially important in case of an audit.
You got it. An audit can be really stressful. But having your records organized can make a big difference. The IRS requires you to keep tax-related documents for at least 3 years. But some experts recommend keeping them for up to 7 years, just in case.
So it's better to be safe than sorry. What else can people do to prepare for an audit?
Besides good record keeping, you should get familiar with the IRS's audit procedures. The IRS website have a lot of information on this, including a guide called Understanding Your Notice or Letter.
So knowledge is power. The more you know about the process, the less intimidating it will be.
Absolutely. And remember, if you're ever unsure about anything, don't hesitate to contact a tax professional for help.
Okay, good advice. Now, we've talked a lot about compliance, deadlines, penalties, audits, but I think it's important to remember that these forms can also give us some insights into our own finances.
Yes, I totally agree. We often just see these forms as another bureaucratic thing,
Uh-huh.
but they can actually be useful tools for financial planning and decision-making.
Right. For example, your W-2. It gives you a detailed breakdown of your earnings, taxes withheld, and pre-tax deductions. This can be really helpful for understanding your overall financial picture.
Exactly. You can see how much you're taking home each year, how much is going to taxes, and whether you're using all the available deductions.
And for freelancers and independent contractors, the 1099 NEC can be a useful tool for keeping track of income and expenses.
Definitely. By looking at your 1099 NECs, you can get a better idea of your profitability, see where you can improve, and make more informed business decisions.
It's like turning a tax form into a financial report card for your business.
Exactly. These forms can be really valuable if we take the time to understand what they tell us.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious what surprised you while researching this topic? Anything that really stood out?
Honestly, it was the increasing focus on the gig economy and its impact on 1099 filing. The IRS is getting more and more sophisticated in how they track income from things like ride-sharing apps and online marketplaces.
So it's not just traditional freelancers and contractors who need to be aware of these requirements.
Exactly. Anyone who makes money through these platforms needs to understand their tax obligations and keep accurate records. The IRS is really making it clear that this type of income is subject to the same tax laws as any other income.
And that's where those record-keeping tips we talked about earlier become even more important.
Exactly. Having good records of your income and expenses is super important in case of an audit, or if you need to prove your earnings for any reason.
So it's not just about avoiding penalties, it's about having a clear understanding of your income and making sure you meet your tax obligations.
Right. It's about financial responsibility.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground, and it might feel a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider when it comes to W-2s and 1099 NECs, but the important thing is to stay informed, organized, and proactive.
And don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. There are lots of resources available, from the IRS website to qualified tax professionals.
Right. Speaking of resources, there's a tool on the IRS website that I found really helpful. You can search for specific forms, instructions, and publications by keyword or form number.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a great way to find exactly what you need.
It really is. And it shows that the IRS website, even though it has a reputation for being complicated, can actually be a useful resource for taxpayers.
It's all about knowing where to look.
Exactly. And that brings me to another point. The IRS has been working hard in recent years to make their website easier to use and make tax information more accessible to everyone.
So it's not just about penalties and audits. The IRS is also trying to give taxpayers the tools and resources they need to follow the law and understand their obligations.
Exactly, and I think that's an important message. The IRS isn't just an enforcement agency. They're also there to educate and support taxpayers.
Now, before we move on to our final takeaway, what's one thing listeners can do right now to get ready for the deadline?
I would say the most important thing is to gather your information. Start collecting your W-2s and 1099 NECs. If you're an employer or someone who pays independent contractors, make sure you have all the information you need for each recipient.
Great advice. The sooner you start getting everything together, the less stressful it will be.
And speaking of deadlines, there's one thing about this January 31st deadline that people often get confused about, especially if they're new to filing these forms.
Okay, what's that?
It's the difference between filing with the IRS and providing copies to recipients.
Oh, right. We mentioned this earlier with extensions.
Yeah, it's worth repeating. Even if you file your forms on time with the IRS, you can still get penalties if you don't give copies to the people they're for by January 31st.
So you need to make sure your employees and contractors get their copies on time, too.
Exactly. And this is why having a good system for tracking and sending forms is crucial.
Whether you're doing it electronically or with paper, you need to have a process in place to make sure the forms get to the right people by the deadline.
Right. And remember, even a small mistake on these forms can lead to a penalty. So double-check everything carefully before you send it out.
Attention to detail is key. Now, before we get to our final takeaway, I want to switch gears a little. We've talked about the importance of meeting deadlines and filing accurately to avoid penalties, but I think there's a bigger picture here.
I agree. It's about more than just compliance.
Exactly. I'm talking about financial literacy and empowerment. How can we use what we know about W-2s and 1099 NECs to really understand our finances and make better decisions?
That's a great question. It's easy to focus on the mechanics of filing and forget about the bigger picture. But these forms can actually be great tools for reflecting on your finances and planning ahead.
Right, like your W-2, it shows you how much you earned, how much tax you paid, and any pre-tax deductions you made.
It's like a year-end financial report for your job. And you can use this information to make decisions about your retirement savings, budgeting, or even negotiating a raise.
And for people who receive 1099 NECs, it's a chance to see how profitable their work is.
Definitely. By analyzing your income and expenses, you can figure out what to improve, adjust your rates, and make better business choices.
It's all about using these tax forms, not just to meet requirements, but also to empower yourself financially.
Exactly. It's a shift in how we think about them.
So as we wrap up, what's the one key message you want listeners to remember?
I think it comes down to this. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to taxes. The more you know about these forms, the deadlines, and what can go wrong, the better prepared you'll be to handle tax season and avoid costly mistakes.
Well said. And remember, it's not just about compliance, it's about using this knowledge to understand your finances better and make informed choices to reach your financial goals.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into W-2s and 1099 NECs. We hope you learned something new and maybe even had a few laughs along the way. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters to you.
Yeah, it's almost like they can be a secret weapon for our finances if we know how to use them right.
Exactly. Think about it. Your W-2, it can help you negotiate a raise by showing your company how valuable you are. Or it can show you if you're not contributing enough to your 401k to get the most out of your employer's match.
Right. And for freelancers, those 1099 NECs can show you if you're charging enough for your services or if some clients are always late paying you, which can really mess with your cash flow. Absolutely. It's all about making those connections and using these forms to get a clearer picture of your financial health.
Okay, so we've talked about the important stuff, the deadlines and penalties and the need for accuracy. But before we finish up, I want to talk about something a little more fun. Do you have any funny stories from your years of working with tax forms?
Well, one thing that always makes me laugh is how creative people get when they're trying to claim deductions. I've seen it all. From pet food for guard dogs that are supposed to be protecting a home office to people trying to write off trips to Hawaii as business development.
Wow, some people get really creative, but I guess the IRS is pretty good at spotting those questionable claims.
Oh, yeah. They've seen it all. That's why it's so important to be honest and accurate with your taxes. It's not worth the risk.
Good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main message you want our listeners to take away?
I think it's this. Knowledge is power when it comes to taxes. The more you understand about these forms and deadlines and the things that can trip you up, the better you'll be able to handle tax season and avoid making mistakes that cost you money.
I agree. And remember, it's not just about following the rules. It's about using this knowledge to understand your finances better and make smart decisions to reach your financial goals.
Exactly. Tax season doesn't have to be something you dread. It can be a chance to reflect and plan and even learn more about yourself financially.
I love that perspective. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of W-2s and 1099 NECs. We hope you got some useful information and maybe even had a little fun along the way. We'll see you next time for another insightful exploration of a topic that matters to you.
Yeah, it's like we can use these forms to really take control of our money.
Exactly. You're like, your W-2, it can even help you see If you're getting all the retirement benefits, you could be.
Right, and for freelancers,
Yeah.
the 1099s can show you if maybe you should be charging more.
Or if certain clients are always making you wait for payment.
It's all about using the information to your advantage.
Okay, so we've covered the serious stuff, all the deadlines and rules and stuff. But before we wrap up, I'm curious, do you have any funny stories about tax forms?
Well, you know, people try to get away with some pretty funny stuff with deductions. Like one
Mm-hmm.
time, someone tried to write off pet food for their guard dogs that were supposedly protecting their home office.
Wow.
And then there was someone who tried to write off a trip to Hawaii as a business expense.
Oh, wow. I
Right.
guess people get pretty creative.
They do, but the IRS usually catches them. So it's really best to just be honest.
Yeah, for sure. So to wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want listeners to remember?
I think it's this. When it comes to taxes, knowledge is your best friend. The more you understand, the better off you'll be.
Well said. And it's not just about following the rules, it's about using this knowledge to understand your own money better and
Yeah.
make smarter choices. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into W-2s and 1099 NECs. We hope you learned some valuable tips. And until next time, stay informed and stay ahead